Welcome. I'm Sarah Rooker, Director of the Norwich Historical Society, and I'm here with Dan Fraser from Dan & Witts and Sherry Mather, a Norwich Historical Society board member, who'll be manning the chat, which is where we'd like you to put questions whenever they occur to you. The mission of the Norwich Historical Society is to foster a sense of place through people, stories, and the landscape. While all of us have been impacted by COVID, our restaurants have been particularly so. And even while having to reduce capacity and go curbside, they have still been business sponsors, donated gift cards, provided meeting spaces, and served essential workers. It is our turn to give back. And thanks to all of you, we have close to $3,500 for the Havens Food Pantry, and we supported Carpenter and Main Restaurant this week. Discover Norwich programs were designed to get you out and about, meeting interesting people, doing interesting projects, learning a little Norwich history, and exploring the Norwich landscape. Norwich Historical Society is able to do this because we are supported by our members, our business sponsors, such as Dan & Witts, a lead business sponsor. Just like shopping local, giving local means that dollars continue to circulate and grow in the community. And I'd like to invite you to become a member of the Historical Society. By doing so, you become a steward of Norwich and help us to offer programs like this one. Our general stores have always been more than simply distributors of goods. Over the years, Norwich's stores have served as post offices, banks, courts of law, barber shops. The local general store was and is a meeting place, a focal point for village life. Often the storekeeper was known, and I'd say is known, as the community's leading citizen. This is a page from our recent comic book on early Norwich, depicting one of the first stores and one of the flatboats that would have ferried goods up and down the river. These early stores also provided a crucial link between the farming community and the world at large. Norwich's stores carried items from around the world, including cotton textiles from England, France, and India, silks from China and Italy, and teas, coffee, spices, sugars, raisins, and dyestuffs from China, Greece, the East and West Indies, and South America. Customers paid for their purchases with credit earned by selling such items as butter, cheese, and wheat. The storekeeper, in turn, sold them in the cities, where he bought the goods to stock his shelves. The complex system of debits and credits meant that a thick web of goods and services bound the community and the store together. The first store in town was owned by Peter Olcott at the time of the Revolutionary War. It was right around the corner of Union Village Road and Maple Hill Road. And there were stores throughout town. At Union Village, there was a company store run by the Pattersonville Chair Company, and down in Lewiston. Throughout Norwich history, there were also several stores right in the middle of town, but tonight we're just going to focus on the Dan & Witts site. The brick building here says Union Hall up above. It was built in 1828. Union Hall was where entertainments took place in town. The store and hotel were attached, which made it easy to have dinner in the white hotel building and then proceed to the evening's event in the hall. We know that Gilbert and Sullivan's HMS Pinafore was performed up there by a group out of Boston. Town meeting was also held at Union Hall from before the Civil War until Tracy Hall was built just before World War II. The white building was called the Union House, then it was the Norwich Hotel, then Newton Inn, then Norwich Inn. Before the inn was built, Jasper Murdoch lived on the spot and briefly had a tavern. In 1889, the brick store and Union Hall burned and spread to the hotel. They were total losses. The store and hotel were rebuilt in 1891, just 2 years later. Here's a picture of Merrill's store in 1891, newly built right after the fire. You can see on the left Ada and Arthur Merrill. E.W. Olds was the postmaster and clothing store owner. He's in the center. And to the right, you see the man who owned the harness shop in what is now the Grange, and Frank Blanchard, the mail carrier. There's also a little boy sitting there on the porch. When they went to rebuild the store, they included another hall and continued to hold plays and town meetings upstairs. This here is a photo of the Norwich Women's Club holding a play in 1914, or perhaps an historical pageant. The Sanborn Fire Insurance map is a map that I just discovered. They were maps that were produced all over the country, primarily in cities. I had no idea there was one in New York, in for Norwich. But here it is, and I've clipped out the piece for the Newton Inn and Merrill store. When you look closely at this, you'll see some codes. So look at the Newton Inn, and you see kitchen, and you see the 1, that means it's 1 story high. And you see that little open circle, that means it's a slate or tin roof. You see the dining room was actually part of a 2-story section. The office was 2.5-story section. There's a tower, which has 3 stories with a tin roof, and the porch, 1 story with a tin roof. You see the little bridge connecting the Newton Inn to the store, and it says second, so it's on the 2nd floor. Moving along to the left, you'll see a pink stripe, that's a brick wall. And then the code is for PO for post office, DG for dry goods, and BO and S for boots and shoes. So on the right side of the store was a dry goods clothing store, and on the left was a general store. It was 2 stories high with a tin roof. And you see it says hall on the 2nd floor. There was a porch, 1 story high with a tin roof. Behind the general store, you see WHO, which was a 1.5-story warehouse. And then on the left, the D stands for a dwelling house, which was torn down to make room for Dan and Witt's parking lot. So as you look at this, note that the fire insurance map covers all of downtown Norwich, so every house has this kind of information in it. It's a pretty remarkable map. Here's another photo of Merrill's store, and you can see the little bridge barely there on the 2nd floor connecting over to the Norwich Inn. You can see hitching posts. There's a ramp on the far left side of the store, and then you see the fence for the house that was eventually torn down. This is one of my favorite artifacts at Norwich Historical Society. It's one of the day books from Merrill's store. Actually, there are 2 there, from 1904 and 1905. And if we open it up, what we were seeing is a list of every person who came in on Christmas Eve in 1904 and what they bought or what they sold. So I'll just share a few with you and tell you a little bit about Christmas Eve in 1904 at the store. The Congregational Church Society came in and they bought a broom for 25 cents. It made me wonder if they had just finished putting up all their greens in their tree and had made a mess and needed to clean it up for Christmas Eve service. Lottie Thomas came and sold a dozen eggs to pay off her bill. There was lots of baking going on in Norwich on Christmas Eve, and W.S. Bowles came in for sugar, cookies, and 2 quarts of cranberries. And Mrs. Barstow also came in and got a dozen eggs, cranberries, baking powder. Lots of people were buying cranberries and sugar and coconut and peppermint and flour. So much baking. There were also some last-minute gift purchases happening. George Reynolds came in and bought a checkerboard, perfume, a bank, and a shell box. And Dr. Goss ran in to get a pair of skates. Something else was happening on Christmas Eve in Norwich that caught my eye. What do you think about this? E.C. Needham came in and he bought a bottle of swamp root and the cough cure. Julie Rogers delivered to Charles Spear cough drops. And Robert Cole came in to buy a cough cure. So people were getting sick, or there was a sickness going around. It was Christmas Eve. I hope they didn't all go to church. Little did they know that not too long in the future, they would be immersed in a pandemic. Now, throughout Dan and Witt's, you can still see vestiges of the Merrill store from the 1890s. Here are 2 cases. On the left, you see one that held ribbons, and on the right is a spool case. And here is a little note that Rose Clifford came in and bought thread for 5 cents on Christmas Eve. You've probably seen this back in the hardware area. This is a lovely set of drawers to hold screws, all by different sizes. Again, another piece probably put into the store soon after it was built in the 1890s after the fire. And this photograph shows you the new parking lot with cars in and out. Now, here is a postcard that we have at the Historical Society that was mailed out to everybody in town. It's undated, but it gives a list of what the specials are right now at the store. And I think Sherry has a poll to do. Why don't we have 2 polls to do, Sherry?
Yes.
How many times a week do you shop at Dan and Witt's? Once, 3 times a week, every day? It's not how many times a week, but how many times a day? All right, 85% of you have voted. So are you sharing the results, Sherry?
They should be shared.
Yep. So there we go. Half of you are once a week. A third of you are 3 times a week. A few of you ate every day, and a few of you several times a day. And Dan, you said that that's changed.
I think so. I mean, right now in COVID, it has changed a lot where there's a lot more curbside and people are not coming in as much, which makes sense.
Dan Fraser and Whit Hicks bought the store in 1955, and Whit recalled, when we first went to work there, they used to put cakes or loaf cakes on a rack and sell them. The cakes had no wrappers on them. In the summertime, people would come and shoo the flies off. And then he also said, when the first loaf of sliced bread came out, people did not like it, and it took about 1.5 years until they would accept it. So I thought that was a fun food story. And do we want to do one more poll, Sherry, right here? There we go. What's the oddest thing that's been ordered at Dan and Witt's? You can vote. Worms and crawlers, 12 shovels to be shipped to Antarctica, lamb tongues and pig's feet, concrete blocks, all of the above. All right, 86% of you have voted. Sherry, do you want to share that?
Yep.
There we are. Dan, you have a comment about those shovels that went to Antarctica?
Yeah, we had a request from CREL, Cold Reasons Research and Engineering Lab in Hanover, and they had a team that went to Antarctica. So they called us up and said, we need 12 snow shovels shipped to us. So we called up FedEx, and they didn't absolutely positively ship it overnight, unfortunately, but they got them there.
That's great. Thank you. We'll move on to a few other photos. Dan showed me this cart back in the hardware area, and Whit, I think it was still Whit, who was doing his reminiscences, said people would come up to the counter with a list and read off the things they wanted. As they read off each item, we'd have to go and get it. Like, for instance, a lady would come in and say, I'd like a box of Maltex and a box of Cheerios. We'd have to go over and get the Maltex and then trot over and get the Cheerios, which might be at the other end of the store. Then we come back with the Cheerios and she'd say, I guess I'd better have a box of oatmeal too. So it wasn't the most efficient system. And much changed as packaging changed, for sure. So now we're going to come to some photos that I took with Dan around the store. And Dan, I hope you'll chime in with me and just talk about what we're seeing as we go through them.
Sure.
So here's the stage. And they stopped using the stage for town meeting anyway, right before World War II when Tracy Hall was built. Do you remember anything going on up there in your lifetime?
Never in my lifetime, but I did find a poster up there that said there was a dance in 1968. That was sort of the latest thing that we have documentation of that happened as sort of a town hall.
Mm-hmm. And why can't people go up there now?
It's very interesting. During a pandemic, the Norwich Fire Department said that we could no longer have people upstairs because, we only have one exit. Well, the building's been there for whatever, 140 years, and there's always been one exit there. It's never changed. And, they had town hall up there with God knows how many people, 100, 300. But anyway, they said that all of a sudden this was not okay. So we, as of August, could no longer allow anyone upstairs except for employees. Today, actually, this morning, the state fire marshal came and we put in a over $20,000 smoke alarm system. And we are now allowed to have 10 people upstairs, including employees at a time. So if people come and shop upstairs for shoes and boots, we've never had more than 10 people in my lifetime. But in the last 6 months, we had no idea that this was happening. So pretty much there's nothing left upstairs because we brought it all downstairs because we weren't allowed to have people upstairs. So anyway, work in progress.
I also was really kind of thrilled to see as the Historical Society person that there still was a chair and a bench left from the town hall era up there. That was fun to see. And this one still even has a number on it for seating. So they must have had numbered seating all the way through. And you can see that they were actually nailed down to the floors. I'm guessing some of you will know what this is. I don't know if it's from the Merrill era or not, probably. Want to say anything about that, Dan? Have you ever used it?
I have used it. It's to measure your shoe size. I don't know what era it's from. They used to be very popular in all shoe stores, but now you just kind of go in now to any shoe store and you just put your foot in a shoe, and if it fits, you buy it, and if not, you don't worry about it. So these things have sort of gone by the wayside, but we still have one. Most people, like you said, have no idea what it is or how to use it, but that's okay.
It was really fun to root around upstairs. Here's a box that I found, and or that Dan pointed out to me, and I blew up the label to just look at it, and because I thought, I bet this is from, I don't know, the 1920s, coming in by train. What was 1971 that this came by Railway Express. So so goods were still being shipped by train, and they were being shipped in bulk. This is an old coffee box that's upstairs, and it connects well to these scales that are still in the store from an era when everything had to be weighed out and packaged. Any thoughts about that, or anything you want to say?
Yeah, so those were boxes that were coffee boxes. And like you said, they used to come in bulk. So before people would actually walk through the aisles of the store, if you've been to the store, you'll see that one step that's out front that was a stoop. And that was sort of the way into a little waiting room in the store. And people would just stand in there and they give their list to the clerk, and the clerk would run around the store and package everything. So much like today, when you go to a bulk store, they get you a pound of coffee or whatever, it would come out of those big bins. The two scales that you see, the picture on the left, that's out in the grain room, and that scale is still being used today. And there's some weights on there that allow you to calculate things up into the hundreds of pounds. And we quite often have people that come in and bring their luggage in and put their luggage on there just to see if they're going to, make the weight limit for the planes, are going to have to pay the extra fee. And we don't charge them for that. And then the other scale, the scale that's on the right, that until I think it was last year was inspected and used, but now the mechanisms in them have worn out. So it's not, the state won't sort of certify that it's accurate, but we still leave it there and people can guesstimate a pound of nails before they take it up front. So, I mean, it's probably 99% accurate, but it's just no longer legally certified. So we no longer have to pay a tax on it, which is a great thing.
You can see it was really fun, especially someone who likes old things, to go rumbling around at Dan and Witt's. And here's something else that I bet every single one of you on this call has walked underneath, but maybe not noticed. Do you want to share about this?
Sure. So back almost before my time, meat used to come in on a hook. So it'd be like literally a side of beef. So it would be like half a cow that would come in off of a truck that put a giant hook in it. And at the door in the back there, it would come off the truck and it would be put on this rail that would then slide right into the back meat cooler. So it would just have to be handled once, put on the track, and then it slide into the cooler, and then the butcher could chop it up as they needed to do. Now everything comes cryovac, so in much smaller packages that are much, meet the weight limits and stuff. So they're under 50 pounds, usually a box, so that people can move them. They won't kill their back. But I mean, when they came in as a side of beef, I guess it could be, 200, 300 pounds. And that was the way it worked. But now with new regulations, nothing comes in that way. So the track still stands there in the exterior of the cooler, but not in the interior of the cooler.
There. Now, tomorrow, when everyone's walking through Dan and Witt's, they're going to bump into each other as they're looking up at the ceiling.
Keep your 6 feet, please.
Let's go in the basement. I'm sure many of you in the winter have smelled the wonderful wood smoke coming up from the basement. And there are 3 furnaces here. And do you want to talk about that at all?
Sure. So the one that's on the left, that's in the way back of the store, the harbor section, which is the newest part of the store, which was the addition, I do believe, in 1973. And you can just barely see to the right of that photograph out in the back, that's the wood pile for that stove. The store's heated only with wood. There's no backup source. So depending upon which doors are open for how long, what deliveries we get, different rooms in the store can be 10, 20, or 30 degrees different. So we tell our employees to dress in layers. And then the middle picture is that little tiny stove actually pumps out a lot of heat, and that sort of heats the section where the glassware is out until till you get into the grain room. And that thing puts out a lot of heat, and it rises up. There's a little door above the stove that lets the heat up to the next floor. And then over on the far right, that is the stove that does the front portion of the store.
We have a photo here of one of the many wood piles in the basement.
Mhm.
And do you know what the date of this photo is? But when do you think this is?
That's my father, and that's George. And it's not the last year because his hair is short. So it could be anytime. He's wood and still fills the stoves anytime he's there, probably every hour. I mean, walking through the basement with the 3 stoves, they're different rates and all that kind of stuff. So you could throw a log into this one or that one or everyone each time you go by. So that could be any given day on any hour, any year.
Sherry, are you watching to see if we have questions as we're going along? You're muted, by the way.
Actually, you bring up, Dan, that George is your father. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Courtney had asked earlier if Dan, your father, was Jack, but I guess that's not your dad. So could you put together for us how all of the Frasers are related?
Sure. So Dan and Bunny. So Dan was my grandfather, and Bunny, who was actually, her real name was Liza, but everyone called her Bunny. They were my grandparents. And then George is my father, and Jack was his brother, who was at the store for many years. And my mom was at the store as well for probably about 10 or 15 years. And now it's my brother Matt and myself, and my brother Rob is there one evening a week as well.
Thanks for sharing that.
And actually, I want to just share what Judy Pond put in the chat. I don't know if everybody had a chance to see it, but she has a story where she remembers in the early 70s when Witt was retiring and they were selling the store to Red and White, who planned to tear it down and rebuild on Route 5. When they were 3 days from closing, Witt told me George had decided to come home from the Army because Vietnam didn't agree with him, and he's gonna help run the store, and we ain't selling. She put in capital letters with an exclamation point.
I have vague recollections of that. So my father was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam twice and came back. And the third invitation he denied because he decided that the lottery wasn't in his favor. So he decided it was much safer to come back to Norwich and work at the store. So that's how that ended.
Well, I think it was safe, but if you look at the next slide, maybe you'd wonder that question. Does anyone know what these are? This is in the basement. I can't see the chat at all, so I'm relying on you, Sherry.
Yeah, actually, can I stop? There is a question about how many cords of wood on average do we burn? Actually, 2 people asked that. And that's an interesting question because we were wondering the same thing. And we have a poll about that. So we're going to just launch that poll right now. How many cords of wood get burned each winter? 10 to 20 cords, 20 or 40 cords, 40 to 60 cords, or 100 cords?
Well, that people are filling that out. Do you have certain people in charge of watching the stoves, or is it just whoever goes by chucks wood in?
Pretty much whoever goes by that can chuck wood in. There are certain, employees, our full-time employees that are there 40, 60, 80, 100 hours a week that sort of know the intricacies of the stoves, and each one of them have their own personality. So, whether you add wood to the boiling pan so that, things don't shrink in the store, whether you have a little click, you make sure so the door stays shut. But it all depends. I mean, if, certain times of the day, there's not so many people there that do it, so other people that aren't used to doing it chuck wood in the stove. But when you get cold enough, you get pretty motivated to chuck a log on the fire.
Do you want to share the poll?
Yeah.
All right. What do you say, Dan?
It really all depends on how cold the winter is and how long it is. I mean, if it starts snowing in August, then we burn a lot more wood. If it doesn't start snowing and it's, 30 below in October, then we burn less wood. And again, on the other end of the winter, it depends if winter's over in February, if it's over in May. But in a typical winter, I think we burn between 20 and 40 on average. Sometimes we burn a lot less. Sometimes we burn 10 or 15. Sometimes we burn 60 or more. We've got a field about a mile down the road that has, probably about 100 cords in it. So we've got dry wood that we use for us. So no, unfortunately, we're not going to sell it to you because we back up. So we need to plan ahead a little bit if you don't want green wood, but we need to have that available if we need it, as I said, because it's the only heating source that we have in the building.
Thank you.
We do have another question from Judy Pond about the furnaces. And this one is, I remember being told that you burn only cardboard boxes for quite a while each fall and winter. Is this true?
We used to probably until the 80s. And then the state said that we could no longer do that. It was, for whatever reason, it was against the law. It was not great. So we're allowed to, use paper and cardboard to start fires. But in other words, we no longer burn anything other than wood in the stoves.
Mm. All right, let's move on to these fascinating items here. Do you want to share what these are?
So those are the compressors and the generators that run all the coolers upstairs. So, they have different lifespans. Some of them are 10 years old, some might be 20, 30 years old. And, generally speaking, each of those runs an individual cooler upstairs.
I think I have one more too, just to show a couple more. That I was amazed at how many you had down there. It looked like a factory.
Well, there's a lot of coolers upstairs, so each one of them. And then, see some soda there. Those are the return products that get outdated or damages, and those go back on the little rolly track that you see down there below that goes out the window. So when there's a delivery from Coke or Pepsi or whatever the companies are, we send back the returns and the empty bottles with them. So those we just keep right by the window there when they deliver.
And here's a little bit more about recycling.
Yeah, so this is the bottle bell, which is in the room right behind the meat department, which is quite often referred to as the paint room. And that's a yoke for oxen, which I do believe my grandfather put up there and rigged up the bell, etc. Currently, as you know, during the pandemic, we're only allowed to accept milk bottles. So there's no beer and soda bottles that come back at this time.
And then they go rolling down to the basement and sorted down there. So I just thought I'd share that too.
Yeah. So if you look down that chute when you ring the bell, that's what the other end looks like. Okay, so the belt that's slanted there, the black rubber thing, that is a conveyor belt that has a switch at the top and bottom that you can make things go up and down, and then the sort of wiry looking metal thing with the wheels that just allows things to slide down to the conveyor belt to get onto the conveyor.
And this is our last slide because I saved it because it's the best stories. I don't know if there's more than one story or not, but I'm gonna let you take it away and tell some heist stories.
Sure. So this was the Great Robbery of 1973, I do believe. If you look closely, this is the safe. It was previously in the office. The office is in the same location, so if you come to the store, you still see it there. And then on the top of this, you'll see it says A.H. Merrill, which was the owners before Danowitz. So that that was their safe. And in the middle of the night, before anyone in the world had security of any shape, someone came in the middle of the night and jackhammered off the door of the safe, probably was in there for 6 or 8 hours, we don't really know, and took a large chunk of change, obviously out of that safe, and got away with it, and they were never captured. And since then, we've started doing night deposits. So there's, and in this day and age, there's not nearly as much cash around. Everything's pretty much credit cards and debit cards. So, but that safe is still there, and I want to say it weighs, gosh, at least 500 pounds, and that's in the grain room, sort of tucked away. We sort of keep it as a relic, and that's sort of the history behind that one.
And then over here upstairs, these boarded up windows.
Oh yes, so those are the windows that actually face the side parking lot. The sort of face the Mascoma Bank side of it, but they can't be seen from the road. So again, somewhere in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a break in the middle of the night, and the burglars broke out those windows. At that time, I think what they stole was beer and cigarettes. Most likely it was high school kids or college kids that then jumped off the roof and ran away with that stuff.
Thank you for sharing your heist stories.
Sure.
Well, that's the end of the tour that Dan gave me that I'm giving you, but I think that we all owe Dan just a huge, huge thank you for being a leader in our community, and for raising so many funds for the Haven and for the hairdressers and for the wine tastings and all the nonprofits and the roundup and the pizza. It's just an incredible source for our community, and you just deserve huge kudos for all of that. So thank you. Sherry, questions in the chat?
There are a couple more questions about the furnaces. So Victoria is wondering what happens at nighttime?
Well, we turn off the lights and we all go home. No, so that we do throw some logs on the fire at the end of the night. Usually the coals don't last until the morning, so we have to usually restart the fires in the morning when we get there, depending upon how late someone's there and how early someone gets there the next morning.
All right. A question, what product has seen the biggest uptick in sales during COVID?
Probably hand sanitizer while we could get it. It's now back on the shelves. Toilet paper was a huge seller as well. Things really shifted from being, people that were coming in the store getting a sandwich and a burger to grab when they're at work, until then all of a sudden everyone's home. So people are then coming in and either ordering online or coming in to get a pound of meat or a pound of hamburger to make meals at home. So it shifted that way.
All right, I have a question from Kirsten's iPad. Maybe I'm the only one who worries about this, but Dan and Wits has been able to stay in business for a lot of reasons, but one is an intergenerational shift of management. Who will run Dan and Wits in the year 2100? And yes, this is a serious question.
I don't know, probably the offspring.
Are there some offspring out there who are interested?
Well, there's some offspring. Whether they're interested is a question to be determined.
All right. I see that Peter's iPad has raised his hand. Peter, do you have a question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So Dan, several years ago, when we were doing a tour with the Preservation Trust Board, you said that you had hoped to start a cafe, but that it was blocked because you didn't have enough of an area for the perking for the septic. Could you talk about that and whether there's any way that might still happen someday?
Sure. Anything's possible in the future. The issue is in Vermont, when you have a restaurant license, your seats are based on your sewer capacity. And as we know, Norwich doesn't have sewer. So we are one of the few quote unquote restaurants, because we have a deli in the state of Vermont that has 0 seats. I think, and I'm sharing this, it may get back, but I think they made a typo last year and they gave us 6 seats in a restaurant. So anyway, but you can't get seats, you can't have seats in a restaurant without sewer capacity. And because our sewer is under our parking lot, which is paved, it's not a porous, missing the word, but whatever. So it's not porous. So they do not evaluate that in the state of Vermont. There's no criteria for that. So therefore we're ineligible, even though our sewer probably has enough capacity to handle half the town of Norwich. We cannot add any seats to our restaurant because it's under a parking lot, and they just don't allow that.
Lucinda asks, what is your favorite part of the job? Is it thinking about sewers?
No, not really. I think my favorite part of the job is just people. You realize that in light of this pandemic too, we've really realized it more, that it's just about people and being respectful, and being nice to people, and that we're all in this together. And it's not, it's the local businesses. If you look around town, it's the places that we want to be there will still be there when this is over. The Norwich Inn, Carpenter, Maine, the Norwich Bookstore, Zuzu's. These are our friends, these are our neighbors, these are community members, and we need to support them, and we need to make sure that we're not going to Amazon to buy things, that we're, if you possibly can, not use a credit card, if you can pay by check. The Norwich Bookstore does a great chart every year about, their 3% fees that they pay in credit cards, and it's in the thousands and thousands of dollars, $56,000 to $100,000. So that's money that's not being spent back in our community. I mean, there are probably a few exceptions, but Amazon is not supporting the Norwich Parade. It's not supporting your baseball team. It's not supporting your singing group. It's not supporting your religious organization. It's the people and the businesses that line the street, the brick and mortar stores. And I think that this pandemic has sort of brought that back to people. When people, fly and they forget their luggage, they don't go back to Lebanon or Boston to pick it up. They say, drop it off at Dan and Witt's. They say, leave it at the library. We've had people that come in and shop and they go, oh my God, I just went home and forgot my kids are still in the toy corner. I'll be back in 15 minutes to pick them up. That's why we're here. That's what it's about, is just, realizing that, yeah, you might pay 5 cents more for a gallon of milk, but if you want to spend 15 minutes and save a dime to go to West Lebanon where you're stuck in traffic, do it. But it's not, you got to really evaluate what's important to you. And I think this pandemic has really brought it back to keeping it local, and understand, like, the way it was 100 years ago, where people, you would run to your neighbor and get a dozen eggs, and you would do this stuff. But prior to the pandemic, we were all so busy and so caught up in our lives with all this technology, which is great on so many levels, like Zoom tonight, but we've sort of lost track of who lives next door to us and why are we here. So just taking a step back and appreciating what we have and the support and the resources in town, but also realizing how important that is, that we need that for our generation and for the next generations. Yeah, I just want to thank you, Sarah, and the Historical Society for pulling this together as one of the many programs that you do throughout the year. And, again, it's a physical space that we're so lucky to have right in the middle of town. It's become a community center, not so much, unfortunately, during the pandemic, which we understand, but just keeping all this history alive for us and moving it forward and seeing the connections to the past and the present is so essential. So if you are not a member, I encourage you to join. And there's no one asked me to do this plug, but it's important. I mean, it's important that we have this connection so we can look back at history and see, the pandemic, the plague 100 years ago, and the similarities and the differences and how we got through this. And again, that we just have this history and this connection to each other and other generations when we want to go back and figure out how problems were solved. And also, I just want to thank everyone, obviously, for keeping it local. So, and obviously to support our local restaurants. They are taking the brunt of this so hard. So, many of us don't feel safe going into a restaurant, which is understandable, but please be sure to order curbside with what you can do, and realizing that, financial situations for people are very different. We all have limited funds for how we can donate to nonprofits, but just look at that. Make sure that you're donating to your nonprofits as locally as possible as you can. And even if you go to the Norwich Inn or Carpenter, Maine or Blue Sparrow and you get a coffee or a thing of fries to go, everything helps. I mean, if everyone went once a week and bought a coffee or an hors d'oeuvre or a dessert, that would help keep them afloat as we get through the end of this. I think the end is in sight. the lights at the end of the tunnel, but it's been really, really tough on our restaurants and the hospitality, industry. So we really need to support them. We don't want those holes on Main Street come May.